now. Let's see. Hop on over there. Okay, good deal. We are live. So welcome to the book club for October. The book is Necessary Endings by Dr. Henry Cloud. And I am your host, Dana Morningstar, and I am here with Shay.
Hi.
So, yes. And we're going to be discussing the book today. So let's see if anybody is here yet. I know there's a little bit of a delay when we get going. Let's see. Waiting for people to hop on. But I guess in the meantime, I guess we can just start kind of talking about the book until people get here. I will say I'd mentioned this before, but this is, I would say, one of my top 5 favorite books on this topic. And interestingly enough, it doesn't address this topic directly. And for me, that was almost, I think, easier because the book didn't directly address, narcissism or abuse or, kind of relationship stuff. It was more of addressing endings in general that I think it gave me the emotional distance in order to see situations more clearly and to see the kind of the wider range of them all, like how it might impact you with friends or with work or with what have you. So
I agree.
Yeah.
And
what did you think?
That also gave me the ability to look at this dynamic, because being unable to do the things he's talking about are a big part of the problem on our end. And it really let me look at other areas in my life where I'd run into that and where I could have done different things or seen the situation differently. And that's incredibly helpful. And the emotional distance, I totally agree with you on that.
Yeah. And so we've got some people hopping on now. Gamer Christina's here and welcome. So welcome. And Shay, before we went live, you were telling me a little bit about this book and how when we were talking about how it's so interesting how different books resonate with us at different times. And especially when you're going through this healing process, like one book might feel incredibly validating at a certain time, or it might give you a tremendous amount of clarity, or it might even feel re-victimizing. And then you read it a year later and it's like reading a totally different book. And so Shay was sharing a little bit about kind of her thoughts on this book. And so Shay, do you want to elaborate a little bit about what we were talking about?
I had the feeling that, especially while I was still in it, it would have been very difficult to read this and really get as much out of it. Even shortly after, I think it would have been helpful, but I wouldn't have been as open to the material, because it takes a while for all of that denial to kind of fade. This can help with that, I think. I mean, I didn't read it when I was still in enough of it to know for sure how that would have affected, if you kind of know what I mean. But it really gave me a lot of hindsight clarity, and it gave me a much more of a feeling of confidence in going forward and being able to deal with things that previously scared the living crap out of me. So,
right.
That's but yeah, I really, and it's like you were saying about that emotional distance. It does give a few relationship examples that are similar. I mean, they, like the unavailable types, that's sort of down the same path, but most of it was centered around business arrangements and, just interactions, friendships. And to me, that was in some ways more eye-opening, because when you're just looking through the microscope of an intimate relationship, whether that's your family of origin or a partner, whatever, that's a really close dynamic, and it's different than every other dynamic. So it's easy, I think, to miss those pieces where you struggle with knowing how to judge character and how to judge the viability of a situation and how to do the things that requires of you. I mean, that's all. Nobody teaches us how to do this. So, we're all wandering around in life messing up until we finally figure it out. But
Right.
this really gave, I think, a ton of clarity on all of that.
I
Really
agree.
impressed.
To me, this book was a total clarity bomb. And,
Yeah.
in my experience, it took me, I guess that I'm still so fascinated as to why I didn't connect the dots sooner. And especially because I was so interested in connecting the dots. So I
Yeah.
guess I kind of look back and I'm like, man, what pieces was I missing and how could I have put them together faster? And then kind of now in this role with doing all this, it's sort of like, okay, how can I help other people start connecting the dots faster and discovering like their own pieces in this? And you're absolutely right. Like this book, and I think it's because he does talk about the concept of endings, which is unique in and of itself. I don't know if I've ever read any other book that was completely focused on endings.
And in a positive way, and being
Yeah.
able to shift paradigms, because how we look at a thing has a lot of power. And if we're looking at, it's like we were talking before about, what it's like to publish a book, and you have all this, like, that inner critic gets up and does a not so happy dance in your head real fast.
Right.
And there's a lot of things that we look at, like if I get in a funk about something, I used to judge myself for being in the funk. And that's where the negativity spiral starts. It's not necessarily that feeling bad for a little while is bad. I mean, that's part of life. We're all going to do that. And if that judgment piece is taken out of, where you're not labeling it as bad, as a matter of fact, you could even start seeing it as, okay, this feels kind of icky right now, but I know something positive is at the end of it. So I'm good. It doesn't last as long, and you don't feel bad about the feeling you're having on top of it. That just really turns into a horrible tornado.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. Every other relationship book I've ever read, or even self-help book, it was all about kind of trying to make things work. And I had been stuck in that for decades where it's like, okay, that's it, right? Got to be solutions oriented. And it, to me, having something end felt like a failure.
Yes.
And that is one of the strengths of this book is he really talks about endings of this is a normal part of life. And he gives the example of, if you're trying to grow prize winning roses, you have to prune some of the branches back. And, it's an understanding that going into it of, okay, I'm here. This is my goal. I'm going to try to grow prize winning roses. So I need to cut back the branches that are dead or dying. I need to cut back the branches that are sick and that are not they're diseased, they're not getting better. And then I need to cut back the branches that might have buds on them or even beautiful roses on them, but they still don't have the potential to be prize winning roses.
That's the game changing piece right there.
Totally. Yes. It's that whole getting rid of good and going for great.
Yeah.
And when he talks, I have my notes here in front of me. I mean, if anybody's interested, if you haven't read the book or if you haven't read my notes and you're interested in that, if you go to my website, thriveafterabuse.com, and you go to book club, and then there's a drop down menu for book club notes, you can get my notes from this book and all the other books we've read. It's just fantastic. And, talking about, well, I'll go through my notes here, but one of the first parts, one of the first takeaways I had. So my notes cover my top 10 takeaways of this book. And the first one is, he says, the good cannot begin until the bad ends. Life is about endings and new beginnings, and life has seasons, stages, and phases. This is what growth is about. If there is no growth, then we are stagnant. Getting to the next level always means leaving something behind and moving forward. Some endings are natural and some we are forced into. And he goes on to say, endings, even if they need to happen, are usually difficult. Some common reasons as to why we don't end things are we hang on too long thinking that maybe things will change. We are afraid of the unknown. We fear confrontation. We are afraid of hurting someone. We are afraid of letting go and the sadness associated with it. We don't know how to end it. We have already had too many painful endings and we don't want to go through another one. When endings are forced upon us, we do not know how to process them, so we sink or flounder. We do not learn from them, so we repeat the same mistakes over and over. And we lack the courage, discernment, or skills with how to handle a situation that needs to end. And then he says, we need to have patterns. We tend to have patterns for why we don't end things sooner. If we can figure out our patterns, then we can work to break them and end things quicker next time.
I would add one more to that list.
Yes.
He didn't really get into this in this particular book, but the self-worth piece, I think a lot of us, even if we don't know there's a self-worth piece, we don't really feel like we really deserve those prize winning roses. And that's another thing to, learn how to own, that every person's entitled to that as much as you don't have to do anything to have that right. We all come into this world with that, but nobody, that's not really given to us. There's a lot in our society that's just a mess, in my opinion. I'll leave that for a different day, but we're inundated with all these messages that we have to earn, attention, affection, caring, all, we don't, there's just a lot of subtle messages that, it's got to be hard work and you have to pay your dues and all these catchphrases you hear. I mean, those are, it's like societal kind of mass hypnosis in a way, not to sound like a conspiracy theory, because that's not where I'm headed with this. It's just language is powerful.
It is.
It's like the whole look, just changing the perspective of an ending being a success, a positive thing, a step towards something more instead of a failure and a loss. And, changing that perspective changes the experience. And that's kind of what I mean. We're not taught to use language to empower ourselves or to be empowered. And I think that's part of the reason why we struggle with the whole worth thing. It's not because we don't think we have any worth necessarily. It's just, like he says, with the discernment and skills, we don't have that inner discernment and skill either. And that's part of what we're learning, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And our words, our self-esteem and that self-worth surfaces in so many different ways. And a really kind of great indicator of that is our external environment. And, because oftentimes our external environment's a reflection of our internal environment. If a person's depressed, their house is generally messy, their car is messy, their checking account is messy. Like, they're just not taking care of things. They're not showering. They're not, things are very out of alignment. And so there's all these kind of signs that manifest in our external environment that are great signals if we can view them that way, instead of viewing them in a judgment way of just, okay, this is what's coming up. Because a lot of times that stuff is so buried, our self-worth or our self-esteem, and we don't realize that there's a problem there. We just kind of realize, oh, we're not getting the results that we want in our life. And then we just kind of think, well, why does this keep happening to me? And I remember when I was working as a psychiatric nurse, I worked at a public health building in the rough part of town here. And with a lot of, people that lived in the rough part of town. And it was so interesting with the different patients that we had coming in. And, Lansing is where I live in a suburb of Lansing, but Lansing itself is, even though it's the capital of Michigan, it's still a very small town. And it's interesting how you can go to the same places as other people and everybody has their own experience. And I always thought it was so interesting. I'm like, man, okay, we're all in the same building together, yet you just got approached. Somebody was trying to buy meth from you, or this other or I kept getting, basically sexually harassed, or I kept coming across bullies, and other people, everybody just had their own experience there. And I thought, this is so interesting. But a lot of it was, I think, kind of how our own feelings of self-worth and self-esteem, and it just resonates on so many levels that we're aware of and that we're not aware of. And, I don't know. It's
We
interesting.
put out signals that,
We do.
subtle body language and all kinds of, I mean, you could go deep or not deep with that, and either way it kind of amounts to the same thing. We're, what is it, like 90% of communication is not spoken language. It's
Mhm.
comprised of all these other things, and most of us are very unaware of whatever that is, and our state has a lot to do with that. And
Yeah.
going through all of this I've gotten into a lot of state management things where I shift my state more intentionally, and it's just all this empowering stuff that makes a difference in the world and what gets reflected back in big ways. So I'm kind of seeing how the hall of mirrors actually works from doing that, and it's pretty
Totally.
incredible.
It really, really is. And that whole self-worth and that self-confidence thing, when Donald Trump announced that he was running for president, I was one of the early people. I remember again, I worked with a bunch of people on mental health, and everybody in the building is like, oh, this must be a joke. This isn't going to go anywhere. And right away I was like, he's got it. He's won.
That's
And
kind of what I thought too. I'm
and
I
a
really
lot
did.
of it, it was the words he was using. If you,
Yeah.
whether politics aside, is, you know, he speaks a lot of things into existence. Those
Yep.
things may or may not be true, right? But
Yeah.
he still articulates like, this is the best ever. This is the strongest ever. And he's very, I think, he really convinces himself, and he's had a lot of massive success in his life. I think because he gets so, he speaks of such strength and of such confidence, and he speaks that kind of stuff into existence. And, um, and even other people that I've noticed kind of throughout my life, where there was a girl well, I've known a few people like this. I had a roommate of mine in college, and she was very much a tomboy. She was not the kind of girl that you would, I wouldn't say, she wasn't like traditionally attractive, but she had the most amazing personality and just like this zest for life. I don't know if I've ever met anybody. She had the energy level of a 6-year old, and she just, everything was like a new adventure. She would just get so excited over every little thing. And I get goosebumps thinking about her. I just adored her. And she attracted men right and left.
I can
And
believe that.
right. And it was her attitude, it was her personality. And I had another roommate who was more like traditionally beautiful. She was like 6 feet tall. She was blonde. She was stunningly beautiful and could hardly ever get a date. And, the other roommate, um, really had this attitude of self-worth, of she knew what she brought to the table, and and she
Mhm.
loved her life, and man, if you weren't loving life, then she didn't have time. And so she just always attracted quality people around her. And to me, it was so interesting because, and I guess for me, I'd struggled with self esteem my whole life. And I always had this mentality of, well, if I was just prettier or taller or thinner or blonder or kind of what have you, then
Yeah.
things, like I had to change who I was in order to be worthy of those things. And realizing it's not about, I mean, it's really not about that stuff. It's just about believing in yourself, and kind of loving what you find, you know?
Exactly. Yeah.
And so let's see here. We got lots of people hopping on here. Interesting. Carla says, is it normal from my past of being abused since I was a child? Is it normal to feel all relationships will be abusive or controlling? I find myself not wanting any relationships. I think that's completely normal. I mean, if that's been your experience, that relationships are abusive and controlling, then to me it makes total sense of, okay, this has been my past experience, then this is going to be what my future experience is too. And especially if a person's had that pattern that's been going on for decades, then they get to the place where they're like, you know what, I'm terrified of being hurt again. So they just tend to withdraw and isolate and avoid people. So it's very
Totally.
common, but that I think so much of breaking free from that, if that is something that you're interested in, is in the in Lisa Romano. I love the way that she describes this. She talks about it in terms of it's not you, it's your programming, because that's exactly what it is. Like, so many of us carry around this programming that we picked up along the way, either intentionally or unintentionally, either from family or friends or religion or culture or you name it. And so if we're going through life with this programming, and we keep finding, we're looking around at our external experiences, right? Like the relationships that we have, the friendships, the jobs, these types of things. And if that's not in alignment with what we really want, if all we have in our external environment is kind of mediocrity or pain, then it's a good time to take a step back and examine our programming, because odds are there's some things in there that need updating, I guess, kind of like a computer. Like, we got some really faulty messages somewhere along the line. If we can get that programming updated, then the results that we have really radically start to change. And
Richard Grannon equates CPTSD to kind of like a computer virus. And that's exactly where his approach comes from, is getting that virus out of the system. And I totally agree with what you said. Totally. And for what it's worth, well, yeah. I felt like her question, that was definitely me. So from my perspective, it's very normal. And one of the things that started shifting that for me is I realized the more authentic I got, the more I learned about myself, the more I enjoyed myself, the more I realized that it's all about being the person that I want to receive. Whatever it is that I'm wanting out there, the more I become that way, the more it guarantees me that that's what I'm going to get, because that's how my interaction style is completely changed. And that shifts everything. We have a lot more power in this than we originally believed, which was probably zero if you were anything like me.
Yeah, I hear you. I think so many of us have gone through life feeling like life was really happening to us because we weren't taught about boundaries. We weren't taught about endings. We didn't realize that we could walk away. And so we kind of felt like, okay, well, I'm just going to, I guess I just have to hang on and be dragged through hell. And then, at least for me, the whole plan was, well, I'm just going to hang on, get dragged through hell until I can't hang on anymore. And then I'll let go. Thinking
and
that
if you don't know about endings, if you don't know that there are positive endings and you have the power of that choice, for me, I ended up feeling like, well, this is what I'm getting, so therefore this must be what I deserve somehow.
Yes.
And you can start off from not really, you don't have to have been a child with horrible self-esteem necessarily. You can be pretty normal, typical, I'll say, instead of normal. And just by virtue of not knowing what you don't know, you can really find yourself disempowered and in a place where your self-worth gets tanked, because it's all being equated out there with what's coming at you. And we aren't taught things like this that show you what your empowerment is, and that you always have a choice. You can, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I agree. And I'll say too, it definitely starts with setting that intention and realizing, why not you? Like, these things are out there, that we live in an abundant universe. And if you believe in a God or a creator, like God or spirit or creator or whatever you want to call it, is an abundant God. And, it's not that these things, that happiness or peace or, solid friendships or relationships or good jobs are only reserved for some people. It's out there. And other people are getting these kinds of results in their life, then you can too. It's just figuring out, okay, what are they doing differently? And a lot of times what they're doing differently is they have that different set of programming. So in ending things, so kind of back to the book, like the ending part of things is so huge, because not only are boundaries not taught, but endings aren't taught. And if anything, we're taught the exact opposite, that commitment is forever, friends are forever, family's forever, depending on the family you were raised in, it might have been very much the mentality of, you get a good job and then you cling to it until you're 65 and
Good
then you
point.
retire, you don't move around. And so it's this whole attitude of that we've been indoctrinated into. Yeah, you just kind of eat dirt your whole life and be thankful for it. And this book is such a radical departure from that. And I think if I had read this book about a year ago, it really would have been profound, because I still remember, I mean, it was just this like wave of awareness and horror kind of all mixed in one when I really began realizing how deep this stuff went for me. My journey to understanding and being curious about kind of sociopathy and narcissism, it started with finding that word sociopath. And because the original path I was going down was found out everything about Jack, began researching stuff, came across the term sex addiction. I thought, okay, that's definitely it, because he was sleeping with anybody and everybody. And then it was somebody had mentioned the term sociopath. And then I'm like, okay, no, actually, that's more it. And so I kept, going down this road, and it was all of these little sign pointers. And I just wasn't sure which way to go. But every now and again, I'd have a sign that would resonate. And I'm like, okay, that's it. And then that's it. And was kind of going down this trail. And I thought it was a fluke thing. And then it happened, a similar relationship, happened again a few years later. And then I was like, okay, there's more going on here. But again, and then even after that, I had a few like shorter term relationships with some really scary people. And at that point, I'm like, okay, I'm done. Like, relationships do equal pain. Like, I don't know what I'm doing wrong. I don't know why I keep attracting all these people. And then I really began, with the YouTube videos and my blog and everything else, looking into it. And that was when I realized, oh, wait a minute. No, I've had a lot of these people in my life for decades, and I didn't connect the thread. It just seemed all like very individual things. Like, okay, I had this crazy friendship with this, really crazy girl when I was in junior high and high school. And I dated this guy who was a total nut job when I was in high school. And then, but because it wasn't such a direct cause and effect, I didn't realize that those pieces were connected.
Yeah. And
And
if you don't know about the endings, it's
yes,
not necessarily that you have more of these people showing up attracted to you, because I think they'll be attracted to anything with legs and
I agree.
anything that's whatever it is they're after.
Whatever they're
That
right.
could be anybody. But if you know you can do the ending thing as a positive, empowering part of your life, and you can sculpt your life like this beautiful rose bush, if that's where you're coming from, you're not getting sucked into them, because you can nip them in the bud when you realize it, and that leaves all this room for other people that you do want. And one thing from my experience is people who are in the cluster B, they suck so much of your time and energy, you don't have it left for the people you'd really find nourishing, and the ones that are around get alienated by all of the junk. So
Yeah.
it's not that relationships are all messed up or you have some horrible point of attraction. It's knowing things like this so you can sculpt what you do want. And that's huge. I mean,
I
it's
know that
incredible.
the whole bush analogy was just so powerful, because that really is it. And I've talked about this in past videos. I had been dating this guy. This was years ago, but I'd been dating this guy for, I don't know, like a month or so. And somebody had told me there, because I was like, man, I'm seeing all these red flags. I'm feeling confused. Is it me? Is it him? Do I have issues? Why can't I just be happy? What's wrong with me? He seems like everything on paper seems like he's a really great guy. It must be me. And I was having night terrors and I just was not functioning. And finally somebody said, you know what, Dana, you've seen this movie before. You don't need to wait until the bitter end to get up and walk away. And that was so profound, because I hadn't realized that. I really thought, well, no, I need concrete proof. I really need to wait until he proves he's a total psycho in order for me to actually get up and leave the relationship. And nowadays I realize, and that whole mindset with the endings, realizing I can get up and leave, throughout time that's progressed. And so it's tightened up more and more over time. And so now kind of my boundaries for that is I don't do, like, that guy had a lot of dark energy, like, and that was definitely a good decision to end that. Cause at the end he started raging at me and freaked out. And I'm like, okay, that validated me. But nowadays it's like, I don't even do perpetually confusing. Like, if I'm confused, if I'm feeling introspective, is it me? Is it them? What's going on? If it's feeling crazy making, if it's controlling, condescending, if it's anything that's in that realm of draining my energy, then I'm gone. Like, I don't
Absolutely.
need to figure it out. I don't need to analyze it. I don't need to diagnose it. I don't need to dissect it. It doesn't matter. If it matters, am I going to be able, is this kind of the right kind of soil for me to grow those prize winning roses?
Yes.
And then kind of what you were saying too, back to that self-worth, is one of the challenges I've had too with kind of embracing this concept of self-worth and self-esteem is the old me would have thought that was really selfish. Oh, Dana, I can't believe you would cut somebody out of your life. How dare you? That's so selfish. And who are you? Who are you to
There's
judge?
the programming.
Yes, there's the programming. And that you need to be compassionate and tolerant. And I confused being compassionate and tolerant and loving with allowing. Like,
Yeah.
you just need,
And we also aren't shown that we need to give that to ourselves, all that compassionate,
yes,
loving stuff. I
it's
mean,
not taught at all.
hello, first in line, if my energy is all drained because I'm ruminating over what's wrong with me, what's wrong with them, what's going on, I don't have anything to give anybody. you know, I mean, it's not selfish at all, but I totally didn't know that to start with at all. Not at all.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's a big piece too, is, it's that realization of, if you're going to get those prize winning roses, then you have to realize that you're able to grow them, like, you can figure it out, and that they're going to require certain elements, and the right soil, the right sunlight, the right amount of water, the right type of pruning. You're going to have to keep other plants away from them. Like, there's steps involved there. And to realize, like, if that's something that you're going to invest your time in, that it's a worthy pursuit of your time. And when you say yes to something, it means you're saying no to something else. And that was kind of the piece I was missing. I was just allowing anything and anybody. Like, if somebody wanted to be friends with me, or if they wanted to date me, I felt obligated to be friends with them or to date them. And
Yeah, and one thing that's been hard for me about the whole anything in the boundaries arena,
mm-hmm.
when you're starting down that track, it takes a while to learn how to do it and to be comfortable with doing it, because it's very scary in the beginning, and it can actually make you feel like sick to your stomach and all these CPTSD reactions. And it's like, why am I doing all this? I just won't do people. I mean, you go through all these things. But as you practice it and go and learn these things and realize, well, wait, I do see that I'm getting better at this. I am capable of doing this. Look how much better the world is with this knowledge, and I'm practicing it, and you start to feel better. And then you realize that you have this safety net, that you can actually keep yourself, that you can give yourself that safe foundation. And a lot of us I know my anxiety and panic attacks pretty much vanish when I can make myself feel safe, because
Yes.
I have that foundation, and I was missing that most of my life. And doing all this actually is the thing that gives that to me, if that makes sense.
Oh, totally. That was a big shift for me too, was I, like, when I was fresh out of all of this, I didn't trust anybody, not even people that had never done me wrong, like people that I had been friends with or had family that was decent. I just really was walking around like, who else has a hidden agenda? Who else is going to hurt me? And that was a really wild way to feel, because I didn't know what was wrong with me. And I felt like that. And then of course, all of these like little mini relationships that kept being more, problematic was kind of reinforcing this idea in my head that people were problematic, people were bad. And I really felt like, oh, I've got all these trust issues. And like you're saying, all of this anxiety. And the shift was realizing I don't need them to, because I was so afraid. I'm like, I just don't want them to hurt me. I just want somebody that has sincere intentions. But then I realized I can keep myself safe. Like they're going to be who they're going to be, and they're people, and they're probably going to let me down. They're probably not going to be who I need them to be 100% of the time. And, obviously that's on a spectrum, but like if they're a normal person, we're probably going to have disagreements, like things are going to come up. I'll be able to handle that. I don't need them to be 100% like loving and caring and this perfect person. I don't need them to help me heal, I guess is really what it was. Like they can be themselves. And if they're dangerous or destructive or disempowering, then I'm going to walk away. And realizing that I didn't need them to be a safe person necessarily, but I knew that I could keep myself safe was a big, very powerful, big shift.
Same for me.
Yeah. And of course there still is like that disappointment there, right? Like but I think that's part of it. How did you phrase it, Shay? You were saying before we went live, we were talking about
the
book
negativity
stuff
tornado.
Yes, the negative.
There's all this positivity thing out there, and I'm attracted to that. I prefer to be positive. I mean, who doesn't want to feel good, right? But there's a lot of shaming for if you're in a funk or you're sad or you're kind of pissed off that day or whatever. There's a lot of shaming in the world for you. There's got to be something wrong with you if you aren't. Everything's sunshine. Put a little love on it. No one's like that all the time. We didn't come here with a full range of emotions not to experience them. But what I've noticed is I used to start blaming myself. I would start attacking myself for the fact that I was in a funk. Like, this isn't good. Here you go again. You're going to go, just all this, that inner critic would fire right up and just start hammering. And it starts this spiral of negativity that doesn't even need to be part of that experience of that negative feeling. And we don't have to call anger a negative feeling. We don't even have to call depression a negative feeling. Mm-hmm. It's a state, if you look at it kind of phonetically, deep rest. Sometimes we need to just step back and pull inside ourselves and reemerge later. We're taught that this is abnormal. Here, go stick a pill in your mouth and be publicly shamed because you have a mental disorder. It's just part of life to go through these things. And we're labeling them in such a way that it makes the experience 99 times worse than it even has to be. And when you start seeing that pop up in yourself and you listen to the words you say inside of your head, when you do have a feeling that you consider bad, just stopping for a second and saying, hey, well, wait a second, it's okay for me to feel like that. I can be in a funk all weekend and that's fine. I don't have to put on a sunshiny face and do affirmations. I can just be like this and that's okay. And that's huge. Just giving yourself permission to be without any judgment. And it takes practice, just like the boundaries. I mean, this was not an overnight thing by any means for me, but it was incredibly empowering combined with stuff like this. I mean, you put all that together and it's like being in a whole different world. I mean, everything is just very different.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I agree completely. I always wonder, I used to be, and I still am, like I'm a big Tony Robbins fan, but I think the downside of, or maybe it's not even his message, but the way his message is often interpreted is, peak state, feeling amazing 100% of the time. Like, yeah, and then life isn't like that. And it's not meant to be like that. Like there's something really wrong with, I think, with a person that's not experiencing that full range of emotions. And
Yeah.
like you're saying, like, it's okay to just realize this is what, this is what it is. Like, this is what my energy level is right now. This is how I'm feeling right now. And then to just kind of respond accordingly and to be okay with taking care of yourself. It's, I think, part of emotional intelligence and,
Mm-hmm.
just self-awareness,
I
really.
mean, where things like Tony Robbins and people like that who are really pro positive state, where you can use that to your benefit instead of looking at it as that's the goal, I should be like that all or most of the time. Just
Yeah.
learning how to shift your state so that, okay, I'm in a funk and I really don't want to feel like that right now. And going and listening to music or doing whatever it is that makes you feel a little better. When you
Mm-hmm.
do that consistently enough that you develop a sense of reliance on, okay, if I'm really feeling horrible, I can make myself feel better. That kind of opens you up to be able to experience your emotions, because if you sit in sadness, you can take a break. You can put it
Yes.
down and go watch a comedy or do something else that makes you feel better for a little while, and then come back to it when you're. And that gives you a really profound sense of power in your body, in yourself, that none of these things are bad, and you do have some say in how it all goes down. It's not just all mud flung at you by the circus of life. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
we actually can do a lot with it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's very powerful realizing that we are not our emotions, that these emotions surface, like we're kind of the being or the watcher, if you will, like behind those emotions. The book The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle probably describes this the best. But it's kind of like if you imagine yourself being on a grassy hill and your emotions are clouds that are just floating overhead. And we're so used to being kind of caught up with those emotions. And that's a very turbulent way to live, because then it's just a series, it's a roller coaster of highs and lows. And
I
um,
agree with you about the power of now. A lot of people get scared of meditation, especially if you have CTPSD, because sitting in stillness is very difficult when you have a lot of
yeah.
that kind of thing. One of the hacks I found for that
Hmm.
is, instead of trying to meditate, if you just get curious and start asking, well, I really wonder what that's about. Why is it that I feel so funky? And you just start looking at it because you can't be curious and sucked so deep into it at the same time. It gives you that
Yeah.
same kind of sort of space between you and the emotions and the stuff going on in your head. And you start kind of questioning things in a way that's going to guide you differently. So that just getting into a curious space with everything, that's huge.
It is huge.
And you
It's,
don't have to sit still with your eyes closed for 20 minutes. And there's nothing else I mean, you can achieve it with that. Meditation's awesome, I love that too, but it's hard for a lot of people.
mhm. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, let me hop back over to the notes here. So, kind of in tune with what we were talking about with the rose bush. So, my second big takeaway from this book is, I've got all these computers stacked up here. It's funny. Okay, second big takeaway. We need to learn to prune things off that are toxic, dead, or simply unwanted. A rose bush only has enough life and resources to feed and nurture only so many buds to their full potential. It can't bring them all into full bloom. In order for the bush to thrive, a certain number of buds have to go. There are buds that are good but not the best. They're sick but not getting well, and the ones that have long been dead. The caretaker carefully and regularly examines those that need to be pruned off. Ask yourself how you feel about pruning. Do you feel excited or anxious? This goes to what you were saying about getting curious. Does it make your stomach turn? If we accept the premise that pruning is necessary, but have a great deal of emotional discomfort about it, then we will struggle to realize our vision of the future and our potential. We need to understand that endings are normal and change our mindset so that we see them as normal instead of as a problem. If we see a situation as normal and expected, then the human brain will work towards making it happen. But if the brain interprets a situation as negative, dangerous, wrong, or hurtful, then our fight or flight kicks in and we resist taking action. If we don't acknowledge that some things are just dead or unwanted and need to be pruned off, then we will forever be trying to fix the unfixable, solve a problem that can't be solved, and work towards a solution that will never be obtained. Endings are normal. They aren't necessarily a sign of failure. This kind of thinking keeps us trapped in denial and depletes our energy stores. And so then the third point, he asks, so then ask yourself, what is the purpose that you're pruning towards? Pruning isn't just cutting back, it's strategic. In order to effectively prune a rose bush, we have to have a standard, a vision, and an objective that we are pruning towards. In other words, we have to know our outcome, and we have to know at what point are we throwing kind of good time after bad. Or let's see, many people have the mindset of fix, 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 which keeps them and their future stuck. Fire the bottom 10% is a good mindset to have in all areas of our life. Getting rid of the dead and the toxic are the only ways to promote growth. Not every relationship has the capacity to bloom into a rose. In order to get motivated to do what needs to be done, a person must seek reality clearly. A person must see reality clearly. In other words, what isn't working isn't going to magically begin working. And then he gives the example of a man who made a major career change in his 40s because his old business was one that he had invested a lot of time and money into, but it was dying because the market for it was dying. The man was able to realize that there was no future in his industry, and he made the necessary adjustment. He had a growth mindset, even though it was incredibly painful. He had stayed in his old field and stayed in denial about it. Oh, had he stayed in his old field and stayed in denial about it, he would have only been postponing the pain of pruning. And that's so true. And I like how he does give different examples, a lot of which are like from business, because you can see it a lot more clearly. And I think kind of another kind of business example of this would be how technology really disrupts everything, and how so many people cling to the way things were because they don't like the way things are now. They don't want to change. Change is scary. Change is different. And they would rather cling to what's familiar, even though like that path is ending, and I see this in the writers group that I'm in. I see this, all of these, I'm trying to think of other, it's so many industries. I mean, Uber has totally changed the way that people, take transportation, and Airbnb has totally changed the way people stay in hotels, and, online school has totally changed the way people go to college. And it's sort of like it's so important that we see these trains coming down the track so we can pivot and make the necessary adjustments. And with relationships too, like if something's dead or dying, are you at what we have to ask ourselves, I think, at what point are we kind of postponing the inevitable by hanging on there? And is us hanging on, is it magical thinking? Are we being romantic about the way things were or the way we want things to be? The Buddhists have a saying for this, that life is full of pain. Life is pain because life is all about growth, and pain is, growth comes with pain. But while life is full of pain, suffering is optional. And that two of the main reasons that people suffer is because we cling to the way things were, and we crave them to be something different than they are. So we're continually clinging or craving, but when we're doing that, we're not living in the moment. We're not seeing the situation clearly. And it's that not living in the moment and living in this kind of fantasy land of what used to be or what could be that causes a person to suffer, because it's not reality.
Yeah. And when you think about it, once you get to the point where you've hung on to all this stuff that would have been in retrospect better to have let go, you've got a pretty dead bush there. I mean, it needs a lot of hacking. And There's a positive to that though, because I like to polish turds. So the positive part of this is when you have that dead bush and you can just whack it and start growing it all over again, you're clear cutting. So it's got lots of room now. So it's not all bad. But when you're redoing this and regrowing it, that's why I loved the analogy of the rose bush, in the idea that it's not just the dead and dying branches or the sick branches or even the kind of floppy branches, you know, the ones that might look pretty decent, but they're not what you really want. That's huge, because when we start really looking at life from the standpoint of, I'm going to go for what I actually want. I'm not going to even bother with getting to the point where it's, oh, should I deal with this? Or no, I'm going to nip that way before I get to that point, because I'm going to follow the things I want. And that's a different way to live. And it never would have occurred to me before all of this happened to even try to do that. I just had no model for it, no idea that it could be a thing. So it's very, very empowering that way. And I love this book. I really do.
Yeah, I know. I hear you. I felt the same way. And it, you know, when you think about, okay, endings are just endings. This is a part of it. And I'll get into this a little bit more here in the notes, but, you know, he really talks about the faster you can get, once you realize that they are necessary. And if you can figure out what patterns have been keeping you stuck, then that alone just really sets you free to do the things that you need to do. And like, you know, it's just sort of, and I think too, and maybe another way to look at it is kind of like an Olympic team. If you've got like an Olympic team of gymnasts, like they all have to be working towards that same goal. They've all got to be able to work as a team and be able to be at a certain level as an individual. And if you kind of think about different people in your life that you're on a team with, whether it's at work or friends or what have you, and if somebody is just really dragging everything down, and it's you know, it's that perpetual confusion and it's drama and dysfunction and chaos and excuses, and you know, things aren't working and it's tense and it's all of this, you know, there's a point, and he covers, and we'll cover this later, but where we have to just kind of realize, okay, we're at a crossroads here. We need to make a decision. And at what point, or figuring out that point of when to work on something and then when just to cut that off. And he goes into that. Okay. So point number 4 is he talks about everything in life has seasons. Spring is for planting and blooming. Summer is for growing. Fall is for harvesting, and winter is for dying and rest. It's important that we continually know which stage things are in. A relationship starts in spring, but then must grow deeper roots and be tended to. Same with business. Some people are continually seed sowing when it comes to relationships and don't ever grow anything with real roots. And we will be in a continual seed sowing mode if we don't end things that we know need to end. To not see the seasons is to be in denial. It's like banking or on throwing that Hail Mary pass during the final minute of a game when the team hasn't been able to consistently advance the ball a few yards during the whole game. This is what denial looks like, especially in relationships. It's overlooking that probable and banking on the possible. Sure, everything is possible. Wait, yes, sure, everything is possible. Completing that Hail Mary pass is possible, but it's not very probable, especially if the way that they've been playing hasn't been effective the whole time. This is the whole concept of like malignant optimism at its best. It's thinking that things will change when all evidence points to the opposite.
Yeah, and we don't sometimes realize how lowered our standards have become in these kinds of relationships, because when you start doing this kind of pruning and start looking at your life for what is wanted, what is unwanted, and your standards start to lift back up, you start to realize that you don't need a narcissist to do that. Mr. Unavailable is good enough. They don't even have to be cluster B. They don't have to be cluster anything. They can be
right.
Just that whole pruning, that I just love that analogy. Yeah. And it's not about I'm being judgmental about that person as a person. It's just not a match for me. There's no,
exactly.
I think a lot of us struggle with, I don't want to be a judgmental bitch. You know, I don't want to I don't want to be that way. I don't want people to think I'm that way. Sometimes you have to make peace with, because people are going to think what they're going to think anyway. And that's a whole nother story, but there's nothing wrong with having a preference and acting on that preference. You can just throw away the word judgment, and it's just discerning preferences. That's all it is.
And that goes back to that self-worth too, because if we think, oh, this person's a really good person, who am I to end things? Like, oh, I must think I am so great. And then we stay stuck kind of out of that obligation, or like, I don't want to hurt their feelings, or there's nothing really wrong with them, so therefore there's something wrong with me. When in reality, there's nothing wrong with, maybe there's not anything wrong with them or you. It's just, this relationship or this friendship or this job isn't right enough for you. And your inner child, your inner being knows that. And that's where all of that, the kind of cognitive dissonance and kind of mental anguish and confusion and introspection come from.
And anxiety
And depression, all of that starts coming from, is that your inner being knows, like, this is not for you, but our logic and critical thinking brain is not registering, well, why? And so we're trying to suppress that feeling and trying to make something that's not okay for us be okay. And that in itself is incredibly draining. Okay, so point number 5, he says, life always produces too much. We must learn to say no if we're going to have real growth. Everything that we say yes to is a no to something else. If we are feeling powerless in a relationship or situation, it's very possible this is due to either our self-perception, which may come from an early childhood programming, or it comes from being ground down by a controlling and abusive person. This concept of learned helplessness, it's where a person internalizes events and doesn't feel that they have any ability to make things different. Events tend to be processed in 3 disempowering ways. We either personalize them, thinking to ourselves, I am bad. We think they're pervasive. Everything I do is bad. And permanent. Nothing is going to change. In order to help break out of this learned helplessness, take out a sheet of paper and on one side, write out everything that is not within your control. And then on the other side, write out everything that you do have control over. If we are stuck in learned helplessness, it's usually because there's an error with some sort of core belief that we have. These beliefs form a mind map. When we have a conflict between what we know we need to do and what we are doing, there are some deeper issues going on, either within our mind map or how we're processing information, especially as it pertains to endings. This is where confusion, avoidance, and justification come from. So it's that cognitive dissonance.
The belief work is huge. I mean, and just going back to that curious space and these idea thoughts that you have, questioning, well, what do I think love actually is? What do I think kindness actually is? Just exploring those things and really seeking out what it means to you and what you want it to look like, and how is that different from what I see, not just in my life, but looking around. Just really explore these topics in a way that's curious, and it leads you to places. At least for me, it gave me a lot of profound relief to do that. And it changed a lot about my approach to things from then on, because it's incredible how you can believe things you don't know you believe. And that is that programming piece. You're right about Lisa Romano. That's incredibly huge. And that's a lot where that inner critical voice comes from. So much of that, it diminishes so much when you get to that point where you're really exploring beliefs and deciding what you want to believe, and really getting into things like critical thinking and things like that really teach you how to approach the thoughts you are having differently and question them and explore them from a standpoint of, how do I really know that that's true? Is it always like that? Is it never like, I mean, these are that catastrophizing black and white thinking. We end up doing a lot of that too from the abuse. And we can learn not to, just by doing that curious space, just gently questioning. I mean, we don't have to be our own terrorist, but just gently saying, hey, are you sure about that? Really, it might not be that way, and just look at it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And
totally.
it really goes along a lot with what he said. I love point number 5, because life does produce too much. And just thinking of it that way is, wait, there's so much out there I could do, have, be, explore. It's okay to be picky. I need to be, because I don't have time for all that. And just thinking thoughts like that often and repeatedly. I mean, I guess that's what an affirmation really is. But to me, that's a powerful thing, to realize that there are so many choices and so many cool things you could be doing, that it's totally okay to pick the ones you want. And that takes all the judgment right out of it. And it makes choosing easier
Mm-hmm.
from that positive place than, oh, I just am trying to avoid all the things I don't want. That feels heavy and,
Yes.
you know.
Yep, I agree. And like you were talking about earlier, so much of it's the words that we use that we're shaping our perception of reality, and even making a subtle shift like that, instead of focusing on avoiding things that cause us pain, to move towards things that bring us enjoyment.
If you want
And
to remember this, think the word abracadabra. It means something like, I speak, therefore I create, or I create as I speak. I forget what the exact quote is, but if you look it up, you can see the exact translation, but that's what that means. So if you think to yourself, abracadabra, it reminds you that you have this power, that you can shape things with how you interact with yourself. That's
it's so true. I heard something
yeah.
the other day, kind of along the same lines as that, of, with words, we call it spelling. Like you're
Yes.
spelling a word. And if you think about it, as far as like casting a spell, like
Mm-hmm.
you're bringing this to life, like you're bringing power into this. And our words really do have so much power to create our reality. It's very interesting, because you can tell a lot about, it was Henry Ford, I think, once said, whether you think you can or you can't, you're right. And
Mm-hmm.
so much of it's mindset, and paying attention to how we're talking about things in big ways and in small ways, and kind of what we think is possible. It's just, I don't know. It's very, very interesting. And it takes a lot to really start to uncover those belief systems, because there's so much a part of us that we don't even, like Shay was saying earlier, we don't even realize that they are a part of us.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of like that saying goes, the last thing the fish notices is the water. Like it's just been around you your whole life. So if you were to ask a fish, hey, how's the water? It would just look at you like, well, what water? It doesn't even realize it. So like if you take a person that's been raised in a den of dysfunction, and you're like, wow, that dysfunctional family must have been really hard. Like, well, what are you talking about? To them, it's like, no, this is just my family. Like, it's not dysfunctional, or I survived it. So therefore it's not that bad.
Mm-hmm.
And we just don't realize that how much stuff we've picked up all along our whole life.
One of the shockers for me was realizing that I had made feeling like I was such a compassionate person kind of my own worst enemy, because there were a lot of things that kind of pushed me down emotionally when I was a kid, where that became my superpower. Well, I can be compassionate towards everybody. I can understand everybody. I can hold that space for everybody. That's not healthy. You
Mm-hmm.
can't. I mean, you got to choose when and how you do that, and what the purpose is of it. I mean, there's a lot more to that. Going around slinging compassion all over people isn't helping them or you necessarily. And I so totally didn't understand that.
Yeah,
That, you know,
I hear you. And gamer Christina is talking here in the chat, and she says, well, how do I know if I'm just being selfish or if I'm demanding my own rights? And Hope had mentioned, she said, we were taught to feel guilty for wanting to be treated with respect. And that, I think that's really exactly what it is. It's uncomfortable at first, the thought of putting ourselves first and having boundaries. And so many of us think, well, isn't that narcissism? Isn't that being selfish? Isn't that wrong? And, you know, it's not. Like there's a balance there, and there's this whole kind of it's the degree that a person's putting themselves first. If it's a problem, if a person's like, okay, me first, but at the expense of you, right? Like I'm using, abusing, exploiting, or neglecting somebody else, especially that's in my inner circle. But I think where so many of us that get skewed is we feel responsible for everybody. You know, if we have a sandwich, we feel that the right thing to do is to give half of it to, you know, the person sitting next to us. And it actually, you know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of, do you remember that book by Shel Silverstein, The Giving Tree?
Mm-hmm.
And the little boy, the tree gave and gave and gave. And whatever the little boy needed, the tree gave. You know, the little boy, I think he needed a chair. And the tree said, well, you can hack off this limb. It's okay. And you need a new bed. You can make it out of me. And the tree gave and gave and gave. It makes me want to cry. The book was such a good book. And the tree gave and gave and gave until there was nothing left. And so many of us think that that's what we need to do because that's the right thing to do. But destroying yourself, giving to where you have nothing to give isn't love. That's not healthy. Like, you matter, and it's okay to have wants and needs and feelings, and it's okay to be here, and it's okay to tell other people no.
And if I think it's kind of a bad idea to try and take yourself from the place of being that giving tree to me first. It's a huge leap.
It is.
It's easier to kind of look at it as, I'm just going to give myself the same kindness and compassion that I'm trying to give everybody else. And I'm going to start there so that I have more to give. And if you look at it more that way, you get better enough at it that the self-judgment piece kind of falls away from that. And you start to see what respect from yourself feels like. And it changes your expectations from others just over time of practicing that thing. If you just stop and say, okay, I'm not going to invalidate my own feelings. I'm not going to, when that critic starts going and, oh, you shouldn't be in a funk. It's okay for me to be in a funk. It's all right. Just learning how to reframe the things you say to yourself and the things that you demand of yourself. It's not about stepping on anybody else or not giving to anybody else. It's just that if we aren't whole and nurtured, we can't help anybody. And it's not bad for us to want to help people. There's nothing wrong with that. It's a beautiful thing. And you can do a lot more of it when you're nourished. So, I mean, there's not one thing selfish about that. And practicing it more from that standpoint instead of I'm going to switch to me first. That's too uncomfortable for most of us.
Oh, totally.
It does not feel good.
Right. And then I think too, is something else important to add to this is when a person, it's like doing anything, any new skill set. Like, it's going to take a little while to get your sea legs and to figure out where's a comfortable middle ground for you. But when you do start setting boundaries and saying no, and no matter how you say no, like, oh, I can't tonight, I've got other plans, even if your other plans are hanging out with your cat, like, just figuring out ways to not do things out of obligation. Other people, especially if they're so used to you always saying yes and going with the flow, they're not going to know how to respond to that. And there's probably going to be a lot of pushback of, you're being selfish. They're going to get offended, like, oh, okay. And a lot of it too is if we've had this dysfunctional dynamic with other people where everybody around us is taking action out of like fear, obligation, or guilt. Mm-hmm. And if you are the one to break that chain, right? And you're like, no, actually, I'm going to do things because I actually want to do them. Mm-hmm. And, I'm going to say no, and I'm going to set boundaries, and I'm going to start looking after myself. Other people are not going to know what to do. And so they're going to be telling you, they're going to try to get you back in line. You're being selfish.
People don't like change. You're changing. Don't do that.
And it's a reflection, of them. Right. And because they don't know how to interact with you. Now the dance has changed. And so there's this whole kind of transition period of setting boundaries. And I've talked about this before, but years ago, I was the friend, like, anybody could call me night or day, 24 hours. I had my phone on. I was this kind of continual especially, you know, for my friends, like if they needed anything, I was always there. But it was to a point where I, you know, I had friends that were going through divorces and all kinds of stuff, but I was getting phone calls in the middle of the night and, you know, or needing to go, you know, pick somebody up or meet them at their house because they needed to, because they were crying and upset and it was 2 a.m. And I felt so terrible, but I was like, you know, missing work and it was really having it's a negative impact on me. And so having to tell people like, I love you and I want to support you, but you know, I'm turning my phone off at 10. Like, call me before then, or we can talk in the morning. I love you and I support you. I've got to go to work tomorrow. You know, I've got to do these things. And it was very much not well received at first, you know, kind of like, how dare you, or you don't really care. They didn't come right out and say that, but it was definitely just kind of that,
The attitude,
this attitude, this kind of quiet, things got quiet. Like, oh, really?
I did the exact same thing, but now it's often 8 o'clock when I turn my ringer
Yes,
off.
me too. Yeah. Actually,
I love it.
My
Awesome.
phone is generally always off. I've gotten to the point where I enjoy it so much now. I keep my phone off and I only pick it up when I want to pick it up. And it's that alone has helped tremendously with my anxiety because I'm no longer in this state of reaction. Did you know your phone chimes, Facebook? I turned off Facebook notifications. I've turned off, you know, all so many different notifications. So I go to Facebook when I want to go to Facebook. I check my email when I want to. You know, I don't get text alerts. I like if I, you know, and that's okay. Like I don't need to be 100% responsive and somebody else says jump and I say how high. Like there
That's
needs
actually a really good exercise in self-care, to learn how to set gentle limits with people, even if you
yeah.
don't have the conversations and you just say, okay, when a half an hour before I go to bed, I'm turning my ringer off. You don't necessarily have to take the step of announcing that right away. You can just do it and give yourself a peaceful night and just start giving yourself these little things, and that's practice. And it's
Yeah.
you don't have to have any kind of confrontation to start doing that kind of practice. And it's amazing how quickly that snowballs into, oh, I really like this and I like liking things. And so you start doing more,
Yeah.
but starting with something that simple is huge.
It is. And, you know, like you were saying, kind of setting these gentle limits with people. I think that's really the kind of the key phrase there is gentle limits.
Mm-hmm.
And so many of us, we go from having no bound, we go from passive, having no boundaries to aggressive, where we're like, you know what, from here on out, I'm turning my phone off at 10 p.m. and you guys just need to deal with it. And then people are like, wow, you just did a 180. You're incredibly rude. And then they go on the attack. But finding
most
that
of us
middle
are going to
ground
do
of
the occasional 180.
realizing this is not, yeah, yeah, you know,
And it's okay. It's part of the
okay.
process.
It's part of the learning process, you know, but then kind of trying to set those gentle limits and realize and letting them know it's not about you. Like it's about me. And, you know, I love you so much. I know that you're really going through a hard time. I totally want to be here for you. But I've been realizing, you know, I really need that solid 30 minutes or so before I go to bed to just read. And so kind of from here on out, I'm just going to be, I'm going to be turning my phone off, you know, at 10 or at 8 or whatever. I don't want you to take it personally. If I don't respond, it's just, I need to have my downtime. And if you can make it about you and not about them, other people are much more inclined to not take it personally.
Yeah, and you can even add things like, well, I would really love to talk to you Saturday afternoon when I have
Yes.
time to really give to you. And I really would enjoy that. And that takes a lot of makes it harder for them to feel like it's personal when you're coming back around and saying, this is so I can give you that time, because then I'm rested and I have something to give you.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot. So let's see here. Okay, so he lists out 5 common mind maps that prevent necessary endings from happening. He calls them abnormally high pain threshold, covering for others, believing that ending things means that I failed, misunderstood loyalty, and codependent mapping. So the first one is having an abnormally high pain threshold. So the solution is to change the mind map from thinking painful situations are not that bad or that we needed to suck it up and keep going. We need to become aware of how much pain we have and had tolerated negative. Wait, how much pain we have with tolerating negativity and how we feel about the people and situations that were dragging us down. If we've somehow learned that to acknowledge our pain means that we are whining, then over time we separate ourselves from those pain signals. We become systematically talked out of our gut feeling, our perceptions, and our ability to use discernment.
That's that
Yes.
negativity tornado.
Yeah, it is. And he's so right about, if we have that programming, that if we're somehow uncomfortable, that means we're whining and that we're ungrateful, it really does separate us from our emotions and our gut instincts. And this stuff starts young, even if the family is totally healthy. Kids get that message at a young age. They fall down, they scrape their knee, they're told, oh, that doesn't hurt, you're going to be fine. Or if a child's crying for whatever reason, oftentimes parents will say, oh, there's nothing to cry about, it's okay. Or
Or if you ever got the message, I've sacrificed so much for you, you should be grateful and not selfish. That message has a lot of beliefs in it. And it's
yeah,
telling you that suffering isn't ideal. You're not good unless you suffer, and you're selfish if you don't. So if you really sit with that and think about that, and if it
mm-hmm.
appears anywhere in your life or resonates with you, because that's not true. I mean, question it. See if you really think it's true, instead of me telling you it's not true, because that's not my right. That's
Yeah,
something that's each of ours to figure out. But is that really true? Do you want other people to suffer? No. Why are we doing it?
right. Yeah. Or, the attitude of, there's other people out there that have it worse off than you. So like, your feelings of discomfort or pain are somehow invalid. I remember, I don't know if he's kind of hanging out in the wings tonight, but Doug, who's normally on, he's in and out every now and again, but he had mentioned one time that about struggling with feeling like basically that his situation or his pain was valid. And I think that's a very common thing in support groups. People are like, you know what, man, I'm reading all these horror stories. Like my situation's not that bad, or I have nothing to complain about. And, but if it's still a problem, if it's still a problem for you, it's still valid. It doesn't need to be a problem in like, everybody's going to have their own stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So realizing that our problems matter. I remember being a kid. I was thinking about this the other day. I remember being a kid and I grew up in a household. We went to church every Sunday. And even though I was never a big believer in religion, I still have always believed in God. And I used to pray when I was a kid. I I would tell God, okay, like here's what's going on with me, but I understand that you're really busy. And so there's a lot of other people that have a lot more going on, right? There's people that are in war areas and, that are in surgery and that are, kids with cancer, stuff like that. Help all of them first. I'll be fine. And then please let's talk kind of a thing. But
Yeah,
that makes me so sad because at a young age, it was very much everybody else comes first. And, I'm okay. Like, I'll just be here in the corner, you
that
know?
was me too, until very recently. Well, past couple of years.
Yeah. And then just, I don't, just realizing like, if you do believe in God or universe or what have you, that there's all of this is available for everybody, like your feelings matter, your priorities matter. Having happiness is available for you. It's not in context to other people, you know? Bear, really. Bear and Hope says yes. Bear says, Dana, oh my God, I did that too. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, that was pretty huge for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Just realizing that you matter. Um, And I think too, back to the whole thing, how kids, a lot of this is like well-intended, kind of bad advice or like bad input that kids are given. This whole kind of separating their reality from their emotions, and
Mm-hmm.
or we see that when we see, there's so much of this programming, right? Like little boys tend to get, oh, boys don't cry. You're a man now. You need to be the man of the house. Your dad
Mm-hmm.
left. You're the man of the house. And the little boy is like 8 years old and totally overwhelmed. And
And
then
then we
has,
wonder why men are emotionally unavailable
yeah,
even to themselves. I mean, it's all of this. It's not their fault.
no. So we think us as women, we're like, we didn't learn this stuff. Well, guess what? Like men learned even less. So
Mm-hmm.
all of this is such this huge awakening of kind of this emotional intelligence, but I think it starts young and realizing, so like us as an adult, we can realize to get in tune with when you're in pain. If you fall down and you scrape your knee and it hurts, that's normal. There'd be something wrong with you if it didn't hurt,
I
right?
think men typically have a much harder time with this particular aspect of pain and emotions because it's just
Totally.
they're shamed for that, and that should not be.
Oh, I
Not
agree.
at
I mean,
all.
the suicide rate is significantly higher for men than women. And, uh, but so much of this stuff it's not taught and it's not discussed. And even and I think the ways that it is taught, it's more about these extreme home lives.
Mm-hmm.
Like, okay, it's dysfunction if you grow up with a parent who's an addict or an alcoholic or physically abusive. And so for those that maybe didn't grow up in that extreme of an environment, we're like, you know what? Things really aren't working for me either, but I didn't have that. So
And we're busy praying to God, saying it's okay if I'm last.
yeah,
On top
like,
of that, so it's sort of like this whole big.
yeah, it's all very, I don't know, very interesting, but it really starts with reconnecting. It's getting rid of that high pain threshold and realizing that pain is pain and it's valid. And if it hurts, it hurts. And to pay attention to that. And then kind of the next level of that is realizing when you're uncomfortable. So like I was talking about earlier, the situations that are perpetually confusing, that are crazy making, that are causing anxiety or depression, to pay attention to how do those feelings surface in you? How do you feel? And realize that you're an adult now, like you can distance yourself from a lot of these situations. And so once we get in tune with what causes us pain, what causes us discomfort, then we can get into tune with kind of our gut instinct, which is more of that low level mental discomfort.
And
And
this goes back to the thing you were
huge.
saying with the phone. If you do something like that as an exercise, like okay, this month I'm going to turn my phone ringer off every weekday at 10 or whatever. Just it
Mhm.
doesn't have to be the phone; it could be something else. Like I'm only going to check my email once in the evening and not at all on weekends. Whatever it is, if you pick something like that and you feel the relief of that, and you realize, oh wait, that's self care. It feels kind of good. It shifts your attention from looking at all the ways pain doesn't have to suck that bad. Well, no, wait, let's look over here at what we can actually do that feels good, and learn how to be okay with letting ourselves feel good. That kind of naturally brings you back to that end more. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
And I mean, that phone thing is such a good, simple, easy, low stress, non-confrontational way to
Yes.
play with self-care, because we don't know how to do. People need help knowing what is self-care. What does it feel like when I love myself? Doing little things like that, you will start feeling it. I did. I
Yeah.
mean, it's just it
And then it's,
doesn't take a lot. You don't have to look
yeah.
for all the big things that are scary. I mean, it can be just little things. If you just do those little things for a little while, that's huge. It's not as bad or scary or awful as it seems when you look at all the big stuff.
Yes, absolutely. And it really is those little small ways of taking care of yourself. And um, once you
All
start
this is
getting used,
overwhelming.
it is. But like, once you start getting used to feeling good, or not even used to it, once you start reconnecting with what it feels like to feel good, man, you are just hot on the trail. I mean, it feels so amazing that you want more of that feeling. And you just kind of keep moving in that direction. You're like, man, this feels like I was saying, before it was like I would turn my phone off at 10. Now I keep my phone off all the time. And so people know, and some people joke with me about it, but it's sort of like, you know what? I don't like being in a state of reaction. So if you're in my inner circle, you just know, like, I tend to check my phone every couple hours. It's not a huge thing, but, yeah. Or
when we take care of ourselves, we are less reactive and we're easier to be around, and it makes a positive difference in all of our relationships and work dynamics, everything. People start to see that difference and feel the dynamics change so much that people stop. The people who originally start with the pushback, even if they don't know they're doing it, and I think most of them really don't, that goes away and transforms into something positive. It's just for a little bit that the pushback is really can be, doesn't always have to be really hard, but sometimes it is. And if that happens, that's not forever. That's not all you're going to get for doing all this hard work. It's not, you don't get a punishment for all this hard work. It really shifts out beyond just you. The way people reflect back to you changes a lot when you're doing self-care things. I would not have believed it if somebody tried to tell me this. So I don't know if this is helpful at all, but it really, for me, was huge.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Samuel says, what book are y'all discussing? We are discussing, it's a book called Necessary Endings by Dr. Henry Cloud, and it's fantastic. So I have notes on my website if you want to just check those out. My website is thriveafterabuse.com. And if you go to book club and then like book club notes, I have a thing of like top 10 takeaways from this book. It's really, really, it's a great book. Great book. Yeah. So let me go to the next point. Covering for others. So kind of problematic mind map number 2, covering for others. Many people who cover for others generally learned somewhere down the line that everything depended on them. They usually took responsibility for others, usually a parent or a sibling, and most likely were seen as a very mature child because they had to be. And so then that tends to transfer over, especially if you have a parent who maybe is incredibly immature for whatever reason. Maybe they're an addict, they're an alcoholic, they're personality disordered, maybe they had children really young. And so they never kind of aged out of that. So they're kind of like mentally and emotionally 16. And so then the child is sort of like, okay, well, I've got to be the adult in the house because I have a parent who, for whatever reason, is not able to be. And then that transfers over into being an adult and then feeling the need to kind of parent the person, if we're in a relationship, feeling like that you're their parent, like, okay. And people joke all the time, like, oh, I've really got 3 kids, 2 of my own children and then my husband, and then my wife. And that's a problem. Like that's actually a pretty serious problem. Like there's something really off there if you're feeling the need to be, a mother to your husband and, or a father to your wife, where you've got to like look after this person and take care of them. And, you've got to be there to make sure that they're eating and make sure that they're, they're taking care of their money and that their clothes are being washed. Like that's some really, really blurred boundary kind of stuff.
Yes.
Okay. Next point is believing that ending means we failed. Perseverance is a great quality to an extent. Your identity has to be separate from any one result. Ironically, a person with this mindset can become a failure because they don't know how to fail well. Sometimes you have to lose the battle to win the war. And I think that kind of goes back to that whole Rosebush analogy of, you've got to know like when to prune stuff back and to let go of it in order for to get the roses that you're trying to get. Okay. Number 4, misunderstood or misplaced loyalty. When we place loyalty above everything else, even if we outgrow that relationship, if we think that ending that relationship means we are disloyal and ungrateful, then we will stay in it long after it needs to end. There is something wrong with your mind map if you are taking responsibility for other adults as if they were children. Usually, people with misplaced loyalty were parented in a way that made them feel guilty for choices that did not make their parents or others happy. A healthier new map would read, I am not doing this to you. I am doing this for me. Loyalty does not mean we put up with the mistreatment or that we are responsible for another person's life. Kind of along the same lines, I had a friend back when I was in college, and her mother, I would say, is pretty personality disordered. And her mother hated the fact that she went to college because her mom wanted her to live at home forever and take care of her, basically. And my friend had this crushing amount of guilt. And it finally ended up entering a PhD program on the other side of the country and not telling her mom until the very end because she just couldn't handle the guilt because her mom would say things like that. Why are you doing this to me? I've given you so much. I can't believe you're leaving me. And it was very much this enmeshed relationship where she was kind of turning my friend into her caretaker is what it was. And she wasn't looking out for my friend's best interest. She didn't want her to date or to get married or to go to school or to move out or anything. And it was so difficult for my friend to finally say, like, I'm not trying to hurt you. Like, I want to date. I want to go to college. I want to do these things. And, but when and it's so, I think it's so much easier too, to see that kind of misplaced loyalty when we're not emotionally invested in the situation. So it was really easy for me to look at that and be like, that is really some messed up stuff. And your mom's got some really messed up ideas. Like your role as a parent, there's kind of this saying, is to give your child roots and wings. Give them a solid foundation, but then to get them out of the nest. And if a parent's expecting a child to live with them forever and to just always be there, and I love you, I can't function without you, like that's not love. Like that's this kind of smothering, toxic dependency. But for her, because she'd always grown up with that, it was really difficult for her to see she knew it was a problem. She knew at a core level it was a problem. But for her to actually set those boundaries was incredibly difficult for her to do. So, okay, the last one here is codependent mapping. This is caring gone awry. It is destructive to the person being helped and to the caretaker. It is a toxic dependency, feeling responsible for another person's pain when the enabling has ended. It keeps adult children dependent upon parents long after they should be independent. It keeps addicted spouses and friends addicted long after they should have been allowed to hit rock bottom. If you are helping someone to avoid responsibility for their actions, then this is a problem. The concept of, we will put up with you no matter how you act, you will always have a place here, is toxic thinking and shouldn't exist within companies or within families. Everyone in the family, quote unquote family, needs to contribute. And I agree. I see this, time and time again, where there's this attitude of, like family is forever, friends are forever, this work environment is forever. And so we just need to keep working on our communication. That'll fix things. But to kind of jump back to his rosebush analogy, like communication is not going to fix a dying rose branch. Like you can try to communicate with the rose bush all you want all day long, but the problem isn't with communication. The problem is, with nourishment or sun or soil or all of these other things. It's just not going to get where you want to go.
Yeah, and it's actually abnormal for communication to be that hard where you're struggling forever just to get simple thought. I mean,
yes,
that was a mind-bending thing for me to really grasp, because I had started to believe I was such a lousy communicator, even though I was a poet and had I had done all these accomplished things with writing. And it didn't occur to me that, oh, well, I'm not a bad communicator. I'm communicating with somebody who has no interest in communicating. And that's the problem. The problem is not in the room, because we can't sit with the problem because I'm being stonewalled or silent treatmented, or, you can't work with that.
Yeah. No, you can't. And realizing that, I think one way to kind of think about that helps is to think, do I have these communication breakdowns with other people in my life? And if I do, who are those other people? Because odds are it's pretty much any other toxic relationship that you've ever been in. Because
Yeah, I remember when I was with a coach, we had done a barter thing. I built a website for her, and she, did I just drop out?
nope, you're here.
Okay, I heard a weird noise. I don't know what it was. Anyway, um, we did this barter thing, trading services. I did her website, and she gave me so many hours of personal coaching. And I remember at one point I was trying to convey something to her, and I had apologized in the middle of it for I know I'm really not great at communicating. It was something close to that I said. And she looked at me like I was from Mars and said, "You're a wonderful communicator." And I just looked at her with my mouth hanging, my jaw was on the floor, like, because I mean, I almost cried when she said that, because I had not had that positive feedback verbally from somebody in so long, because at that time I was pretty isolated. And it really made me start thinking about, well, wait a second, if what she's saying is true and it's not me, then something's really wrong over here.
Yeah.
And that's just the amount of mind spin that this kind of dynamic can pull us into, where we just get so lost with what's not even true about ourselves, trying to communicate and trying to solve problems that no one else is participating in trying to solve. That's crazy making, and it really diminishes your self-trust to the point where it defies words to even explain what that does to a person's self-trust. Probably everybody sitting here listening to us already knows this, and I don't have to explain it, but it's just, it's awful,
Yeah. Yeah, it really is. And that's a very big aha moment in realizing that not everybody is solutions oriented. And
Yeah.
if you find yourself, really, most confusion can be cleared up within 5 minutes.
Yes.
And if it's perpetual, if you're feeling like you're having to pull teeth or push a rock up a hill to try to get the truth out of a person, you're being manipulated and you're being lied to. So it's or you're just being played with. There's a lot of crazy makers out there who really enjoy, baiting people into arguments just so they can try to wrestle them down verbally and win the argument. And it's exhausting. It goes back to paying attention to how you feel. If you leave that person's company feeling exhausted, irritated, frustrated, rehashing conversations, wondering how did the conversation go so far off on the rails, then odds are it's them and it's not you, especially if you don't have this dynamic with other people. And especially if they can't have a mature conversation about it where things get resolved and then it stops happening. Like I had a crazy maker for a friend. We were friends for like 15 years because there was so much about him that was really amazing and awesome. But seriously, every conversation, especially over the phone or over text, it would just end in frustration and crazy making and me feeling I needed to defend myself and kind of snarky little subtle put downs and me rehashing conversations and all of this. And finally I was like, this isn't fun. Like, this isn't fun anymore. The good times are really good with him, but holy crap, like this is exhausting and it's draining. And I don't have this dynamic with other people in my life. And so I don't need this. Like I'm done. And so realizing that it's, like Maria in the chat was saying, you don't need to be the one doing 100% of the work in a relationship. And if you're the one that's trying to rehash, well, how could I have been more clear about that? How could I have framed that better? How could, all of this stuff, it shouldn't be that difficult. Like there's more going on there. So, okay, let's see. So, okay, point number 7. I really like this part of the book. Hope and wishful thinking are not the same thing. Hope is one of the most powerful forces in the world. However, nothing can distort reality like hope. Hope relies on not seeing the situation clearly. To see it clearly, we need to realize how bad things are and how long we are planning on holding on. Hope is designed to buy us more time with the goal that what we want to happen will eventually happen. If hope is misplaced, it can be the most damaging quality a person can have. We need to be able to discern the difference between waiting for results and being in denial. And
I loved that too. And this is the
yeah,
part of the book where it really gets into giving you some actual discernment skills that I
yes,
thought rocked.
yes. And he gives two examples about that. He gives the example of Jeff Bezos, the CEO of Amazon. Jeff founded Amazon in 1994. Amazon didn't make a profit until 2001. Jeff had hope and a vision that his other investors didn't, and it paid off. However, it's important to point out this was not a gamble. Jeff was hot on the trail of success. He had more and more people using his website every day. His hope was well placed because of the results he was already getting. And then he compares it to a woman who was married to an alcoholic for a long time. She finally gave up hope. The strategies she was using to try and change him weren't working. And it was finally when she was ready to walk away and do something different that he began to change. He finally went to rehab and got sober. The definition of hope is the desire or expectation or grounds for believing that something will change. The problem is when there are no grounds for believing things will be different. This is not hope, this is wishful thinking. You wouldn't go to a bank lender and tell them that your business is a financial mess, but that you hope next things would be different and that you have no plan, but you just hope it'll be different. So please loan me some money. They would not give the loan. If you were to go in there and say that we have contracts in the works with some major companies, we have pre-sales of some products, we have more traffic to our website than last year, then they will listen. Hope cannot be defined by desire. It needs to be defined by an actionable plan that shows any more time thrown at this is an investment and not a waste. And I think it's true in business. It's true if you're married to an addict or an alcoholic or to an abusive person. With an addict or an alcoholic, it's very much, everybody wants, right? Like, oh, I want to change. I want to lose weight. I want to, whatever. Like, we all want. Like, wanting isn't enough, and wanting is not a strategy. It's just, I have desire, right? Like, okay, so what? But it's like an addict may say, okay, I really want to get sober. But what he's talking about here is, okay, then what's the plan? And then the plan would normally be, okay, I'm going to go to 30 AA meetings in the next 30 days. I'm going to find a sponsor. I'm going to be going to the 7 p.m. meeting that's downtown. I am going to, uh, you know, maybe go to rehab for 1 week. I'm going to continue going to AA meetings. After I do those first 30 meetings in 30 days, then I want to start doing, a meeting 3 times a week, and I'm going to call my sponsor. Like, there is a plan in place. And so I see this time and time again, people stay sucked into these relationships. They're like, well, I feel obligated to give him or her another chance. They said that they were sorry. It's like, so what? That's on the same page, or that they want to make it work. That's on the same level as somebody saying like, well, I really want to lose weight. Okay, now prove it. It doesn't
And
matter
going
what
back to what we
you
were
want.
just talking about
Yeah.
with the conversations, that's another way this particular point really plays in. Because if you're keeping on having the same conversations about the same topics, trying to explain it another 1,000 different ways so that maybe you can get through, if you're trying, that's that hope piece. The malignant hope of it is you get hooked into that. But if I could only get through, when getting through isn't that hard if somebody actually wants to hear you. And
Yes.
that's important to understand. If somebody wants to understand you and wants to hear you and wants a solution, you're right. It only takes 5 minutes usually. I mean, it's not that hard. And that was huge for me to realize that it's actually not supposed to be anything like that.
Yeah. And Deanna said here in the chat, I'm so scared to leave. I think he will have a better life. He will be with somebody else, and I will feel like everything is my fault. I will tell you, if I had a nickel for every single time I've heard this from other people, I would be a millionaire. That is such a common mindset. And I think
I
we've
felt
all,
like that for a
oh
while.
my
Yeah.
God, I did too. Like, oh, it's something to do with me, that maybe the miracle is going to happen if I don't want to give in now. Right. Like I've already put in so much time and energy and money and hope and love and, trying to get them to change. And then what if I leave? And then what if the magic happens and somebody else is going to reap all of the rewards of all of my hard effort over the past year or 10 years or 40 years? And that's hard. It's hard to let go of the what if. And it's even harder because a lot of times what abusive people do is, if you do leave, then they put on this grand display. They'll find somebody else like that. And then they put on this grand display of how happy they are, which twists the knife even more of thinking, oh no, my worst fear really did happen. They found somebody else. Now they are happily ever after. But what you're really seeing, especially with an abusive person, is that new target is in that ideal. They and the new target are both in that idealization cycle of abuse. And everybody goes through a different idealization cycle that lasts different lengths of time. And everybody goes through a different devalue cycle and then possibly a discard cycle. So just because you're not seeing what's going on behind closed doors doesn't mean that they've changed. And really, there's a saying out there, neurons that fire together wire together, meaning kind of how a person's behavior is how they tend to be. We kind of get in these like neural cognitive ruts, like that's habits, it's routine. And if somebody has, this is another reason why they kind of say once a cheater, always a cheater. Once you've opened that door, then it's not such a big deal to keep opening that door. So it's the shock of, there's kind of this fear factor of, oh, I can't go through that door. But once you open Pandora's box, the worst case is already out there. For and especially if the spouse has stayed, then they know there's no consequences to my actions. Like she's already forgiven me once. What's another time? Like it's really not that big of a deal if I've already cheated once. And so, do you see what I'm saying? So then things really become a problem. But like, it's habit. If a person, if that's how they deal with things, that they're going to lie or cheat or steal or manipulate or hit or yell or cuss, that's kind of already in their playbook of how they handle life. And so if they've already opened that door once, odds are they're going to continue to open it because their brain has linked up. This is how you handle things. Right.
And that's how you avoid dealing with anything you don't want to deal with.
Yes. And it's the
They're
same
not
thing.
going to suddenly turn around and stop doing what's working for them. They'll just pick somebody else who'll put up with it until they won't. That's
until they're tired of getting dragged through hell, and then they'll let go, or they get better at hiding it, or some combination of both of them. And, it's sort of like, with an alcoholic or an addict, it's very much this whole thing of 100% sobriety. Like you've already opened that door to Pandora's box. You've already had this evil unleashed in your life, and you've already been incredibly miserable about it. You can never go back there and open that door again, because the odds of it being unleashed again is very, very, very high. And it's that same way with any behavior, and it's a challenge if it's one thing, a person doesn't need to drink alcohol to live, right? But it's the same kind of thing. People that have, that are binge eaters, or that struggle with, anorexia or bulimia or overeating or overspending, if there's already that undercurrent of disordered thinking there, it's so easy for them to slip into another eating disorder or racking up credit card debt again, because those links have already been made in a person's brain.
And you can't not eat.
And you can't not eat or not spend money, you know? So
Yeah.
that's a challenge for them. But like in terms of these relationships, realizing this person has this pattern of behavior, and unless they experience pain from it, and unless they're highly motivated to change it, and unless they have a plan to actually change it, and they're is again, kind of going back to losing weight, it's one thing to be like, oh, I really want to lose weight, and that motivation may get a person to go to the gym for the next 2 weeks, but then that motivation fizzles out, things aren't so bad anymore, right? A person has to stay in this state of being uncomfortable with what they're doing in order to actually move forward. And the problem with abusive people, especially narcissists, is they don't have a problem with anything that they do because they feel so entitled to act that way. So there is no, like with an addict or an alcoholic, they can hit rock bottom. They can get a DUI, they can go to jail, they can get fired from their job, you know, they get in a car accident. These things can happen to them. It doesn't happen to necessarily to really to a narcissist. Or if it does, the narcissist blames everybody else. You shouldn't have let me do X, Y, and Z. If you had been different, I wouldn't have done that. Like, so I guess the answer to your question is a person's not going to change unless they're highly motivated and consistently motivated to change. So hoping that he's going to have this amazing life with the next person when nothing else points to that being the case is not the case, right? That's just your fear speaking. So, okay, let's see. Okay, so having an actionable plan. Oh, actually, real quick, back to that having an actionable plan thing, because I hear this every now and again too, where generally it's more of like on the sociopathic end of things, where that emotional manipulator is self-aware enough to know they can say all the right things. They can cry crocodile tears. They can apologize. They can promise therapy. They can jump through any hoop that you need them to jump through in order to keep you sucked in. And so it might look like there's an actionable plan, but this is where it's really important to get crystal clear with where is your line in the sand? How long are you going to hang on for? If they're promising change, you know, are they going to actually work this plan? And then what happens? Because odds are 9 out of 10 times that what happens is they get better at hiding it, especially when you're dealing with issues that involve character, like lying, cheating, stealing. So to get clear with yourself, if they do this again, at what point are you going to leave? Because if you keep staying, then they're probably not going to change anyhow. But it's a mistake to stay thinking that this time is going to be different when all they've done over the years has just gotten better at hiding it. So if you're going to stay, then I think it's important to at least be realistic about it and be like, okay, I'm going to stay married to this person who continually lies and cheats and steals from me. And so at this point, dealing with reality, it's uncomfortable. You know, that might mean, okay, then my partner, we're going to need to practice safe sex. I'm going to need to get tested. You know, like you got to just deal with the reality of it. I had a friend of mine who was married to a guy who was, I would say, a sex addict and a narcissist. And she kept wanting to live in denial about that. And I mean, she kept finding him on dating sites, and it was this whole thing. Like she'd catch him cheating, you know, she'd yell and scream. He'd kind of just brush the whole thing off. He'd never apologize. He'd never have the conversation about it. She thought by her yelling and screaming was her setting boundaries and trying to set him straight. You know, and now they finally got divorced, but it's this realization of, oh my God, they've been married for 13 years. And what has he exposed her to? Because he's been sleeping with everybody, you know? But in her mind, it was like, no, we're married. So I was just like, we're just not seeing the situation clearly. So it's really important to live in reality. Okay. Point number 8, the past is the best predictor. The author, oh, I like this part. The author gives the example of a friend whose daughter's boyfriend wanted to talk to him about how to propose to her. He encouraged the friend, to base his approval on signs of the guy's character and not simply because he liked him as a person. He told him to ask the guy for his credit report and his last 2 years of taxes. This isn't about how much money he makes. It reveals on how well he honors his obligations, obeys the law, has his affairs in order. Both show a person's character. It shows a person's promises, commitment, and responsibility. A credit card company doesn't consult a psychic or look at how hopeful or enthusiastic you are that you'll pay them back. They look at past results via your credit report. And then he says, well, can't somebody do better than their past? Sure, but there better be damn good reason that we think they'll do better. And I really like that it's looking at character and not personality. It's so easy to get caught up in words and in likability and charm. And if you've ever dealt with a sociopath, then that's what you're dealing with. You're dealing with the Bill Cosbys of the world or the Bernie Madoffs of the world. And to not look at personality, but look at character and base your decision on that. If a person's got, they haven't been paying so they've got multiple children out there, they're not paying child support, they have a criminal history, they've gone to jail, especially if it's for domestic violence, if they don't pay their bill. And that was one of the early warning signs for me with Jack, is he was bouncing checks right and left. He had 2 children in another country that he had 0 contact with and 0 interest in. And it was funny because my mom had said, after everything kind of came crashing down and the reality of him came out, that was one of the things she said was, she's like, right there, that was a huge red flag for her, that he had nothing to do with either one of his children. And I justified that. And that's something that I shouldn't have justified, because that is a huge red flag. If a man or a woman has no desire to be involved with their children, especially minor children, there's something going on there. That's a big problem. And also there's no reason to think, oh, well, if I get married to them and have children, that things will somehow be different. If they already have existing children, especially minor children, there's no reason to think that you're going to have this happy family, that they're going to treat your children with love and honor and respect when they have no other pattern of doing that. Okay. Point number 9. Understanding when hope is appropriately placed in a person. Asking yourself, do I want the same reality, frustration, or problem 6 months from now? Do I want the same level of treatment a year from now? Do I want to be having these same conversations 2 years from now? What reason is there to have hope that tomorrow is going to be different? What in the picture is changing that I can believe in? So, and he gives a story of a businessman who said that he doesn't invest in other businesses outside of his own. The author said he knew that wasn't true, as he knew that he had invested in some other businesses. The guy said, no, I don't know anything about those industries, and I didn't invest in those businesses, but I did invest in the people that run those businesses. In other words, are you betting on the relationship or on the person? Are you betting on the horse or the jockey? Your investment is best made in the person.
I think that's pretty profound.
For sure. And a person's character is their destiny. And to ask yourself, who am I dealing with? So often we look towards what we wish will happen instead of the reality of a situation. The person who is not bringing results is not, Sometimes we look towards what we wish will happen instead of the reality of a situation. The person who is not bringing results is really, quote unquote, sorry and promises to do better. The person who isn't performing, quote unquote, gets it and tells you that she is really committed this time. You want the best for the person and you want to believe that they can do better next time. You don't want the confrontation with them or the stress of starting over, so you are motivated to make it work and are banking on your desire for what could be instead of banking on what is. Recommitment does not make a person who is unsuited for a position somehow suited for it. Promises of someone who has let you down in the past mean nothing in terms of the future. It is irrational to listen to any good idea or plan of change from a person who is a proven non-performer. And let's see. In order for change to happen, 9 things must be in place: verifiable involvement in a proven change process, additional structure, monitoring systems, new experiences and skills, self-sustaining motivation, admission of need, the presence of support, skilled help, and some success. And like we were talking about before with kind of that an addict or an alcoholic, like there needs to be, okay, I'm going to go to AA. I'm going to quit drinking. I'm going to throw out all the alcohol in the house. I'm going to get a sponsor. I'm going to go to 30 meetings in 30 days. Like this is my plan of action. And then there needs to be that period where, because it's learning a new skill set, like they have to basically learn how to live life sober, And so then and part of that is identifying their triggers and figuring out, okay, well, do I normally drink on a Friday night with friends, or do I normally drink when I'm stressed out from work? And then watching as these life stressors come up, how do they keep handling things in the same way, or how are they now handling situations? So just like with an abusive person, they may swear up and down, I am not going to yell anymore, or I'm not going to hit anymore. And it's one thing, it goes back to that. Well, that's really nice that they want to change, but wanting doesn't change people. It's all of these 9 steps that actually change people. So what strategies and systems are they going to put into place so that things are going to be different? And
this is one of the areas where the all the business examples are really helpful, because you get to see how these are applied when it's not a relationship, and it makes you look at relationships differently, or it did me.
Yes. Yeah, it really gives you that emotional distance to see, like a person, from a business standpoint, a person's they can either do their job or they can't. And if they're a non-performer, then they need to be fired. And in a relationship setting, if a person, is a non-performer and they're not producing the results, they're not working as a team, they're not getting anywhere, then they need to be fired. And, it's about cutting off those branches. This is just not working. And again, kind of like learning any new skill, being sober, a person, if they're going to stop yelling or hitting or whatever, it doesn't happen overnight. Like they have to relearn all of those neurons. Like I was saying, neurons that fire together, wire together. There's all this brain chemistry that's got to happen. That's got to go on. So they create like new neural pathways. And that doesn't happen overnight. And sometimes it never happens, no matter how much a person really wants it. So that's where it's so important for us to get clear of, are they saying that they want to change? Are they actually taking steps to change? Because anybody, can like be pleasant to be around when they're feeling, when they're in a good mood. It's when they get triggered, when their insecurities come up, when they have a bad day, when things don't go the way that they want them to, then how are they going to handle it? It's sort of like it's easy to meditate when you're at like a, Zen Buddhist retreat. It's easy to feel calm there, but the real challenge is, can you feel calm in the middle, like while you're sitting in traffic? Kind of a thing. And that's why it's so important to just get that line in the sand of, how long am I willing to wait for them to change? Because there's a very solid chance that change is not going to happen. Okay. And he goes into, I like this part. There's 3 types of people out there. So know what you're dealing with. There's wise people, foolish people, and evil people. You cannot deal with everyone in the same way. Most of us have some of all 3 character or categories within us. The labels are not rigid, they are pointers. The wise person, when the truth presents itself, the wise person sees the light, takes it in, and makes adjustments, even if the truth is hard to hear. They see the truth as a gift. You don't get a resistance or a fight. The result is that they learn and they get better at the result of the feedback. Wise does not mean the smartest, the brightest, the most talented, the most gifted, the most charismatic, or charming. While a certain degree of wisdom may coexist with these traits, it is completely unrelated. There are brilliant, charming fools out there. The main criteria is that they can take feedback and make the adjustment. The wise and mature person meets the demands of life, while the immature person demands that life meets their needs. And a mature person, they can handle feedback, they can embrace feedback. They don't allow problems that have been addressed to turn into patterns. They adjust and they fix them. They own their performance. Their relationships are strengthened by feedback. They empathize and express concern about the results of their behavior on others. They show genuine remorse. You get the feeling that they are concerned about the issue and truly want to do better. There is nothing to work on if a person you are dealing with is not wise. And I just wanted to add, because I could totally see how that could be twisted when a person's being abused, because the abuser's mentality is it's all your fault. Like if you just did things differently, I wouldn't yell at you, I wouldn't treat you this way, I wouldn't cheat, blah, blah, blah. And we're not responsible for anybody else's behavior, especially when you're talking about character issues. And there is no excuse for abuse, and you can't make somebody abuse you. So everybody needs to own their own behavior. Okay, the next type of person is the fool. The problem with the fool is that they never think the problem is with them. They blame everyone else and they're not accountable for their actions. The fool tries to adjust the truth so he does not have to adjust to it. Where the wise person adjusts to the truth, the fool adjusts the truth so they don't have to do anything different. There is no point in giving feedback or trying to work as a team with a fool. The difference between being foolish and being a fool is the difference between there being an event and there being a pattern. Could the fool change? Perhaps, but why stick around and make yourself nuts in hopes that they will change? Conversations with the fool never get resolved. It's the same issues continuing to come up. Living life with the fool is like living life full of frustration, crazy making, despair, and hope deferred. Just like a wise person doesn't equate to being smart or gifted, a fool doesn't equate to being dumb or lacking talent. The fool may be the smartest, most gifted, or most charming person in the room. It's often our attraction to their good talents that keep us hooked in, thinking that one more conversation will change things. Let's see. The important theme with the traits of a fool is to recognize a lack of ownership and a refusal to take responsibility to change their behavior to meet the demands of life. They want the outside world to change instead of making a change themselves. Strategies for dealing with the foolish person are to see them for what they are and to stop talking. The definition of crazy is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. If you had the same conversation 63 times, what makes you think that the 64th time will be different? It's time to have a different conversation, and it's time to examine a new problem. The new problem to examine is that talking doesn't help. The fact that they aren't changing isn't the problem. The problem is that no change is happening. It's now time to examine limits and consequences so you can limit the fool's collateral damage on you. And so then he gives some examples of things at work. Susie, I've tried to get you to see the issue and to change it, and that has not helped. I have to make sure that this issue is not affecting me or the team anymore. So I'm giving this project to somebody who can do what needs to be done. Or Sam, I cannot allow myself to be hurt or endangered anymore by your drinking. The next time it happens, I will leave the work event or the house and I will go somewhere where I am not affected by it. Or Keith, your anger is hurtful to me and I cannot allow myself to be yelled at anymore. So the next time it happens, I will leave. Consequences are often the next essential step. Whereas feedback has not helped and limits will protect you from the damage, consequences can either end things or be the point at which a person hits rock bottom, wakes up, and begins to turn things around. So, and he lists some more examples. Mary, we've had several gatherings where you drank too much and you ruined it for everyone. Until you can control yourself, you will no longer be invited. Or Barbara, your numbers at work are not improving. I've tried giving feedback and that has not helped. You continue to fight me and blame others. You're fired. Bosses and family may fight about this and say, but he needs to change this. The author's response is apparently he doesn't need to change, because if he did, he would. Just because you feel that he needs to change this doesn't mean that they feel the same way. The only way to transfer the consequences off of your shoulders and onto theirs is with consequences. So
I really liked that.
I do too. A plan that has hope. So like a legit plan is one that has limits, consequences, and awareness of the problem by both people. And then he mentions evil people. With evil people, get out of helping mode and get into protection mode. He recommends, how did he put it? Guns, lawyers, or money. Basically, keep yourself safe. Have all communication go through an attorney. Keep a paper trail of everything. Don't confront them or follow them to where they're trying to lead you, either physically or emotionally. Call the police. Have a person with force or a weapon be between you and them. Evil people are not reasonable, and to think that you can reason with evil is foolish. Foolish people don't intend to hurt people, but evil people do. Anyone who has shown you that they are intentionally hurting you needs to be avoided at all costs. The longer you try to help evil to turn into something good, the more vulnerable you are making yourself. Sure, they may change, but they're not going to change with you reasoning with them or giving them another chance to hurt you. They often need severe consequences to get them to wake up and see the light. Jail time does some people good. Do not talk to evil people at all, period. If you must communicate with them, let them know that they can communicate with you through an attorney. And there's also different apps out there for like third-party apps. So if you're like, I have a 2-year-old and we're divorced and my ex is a total psychopath and is just awful. There are like these neutral platforms that you can utilize, that you can get this court appointed where all communication has to go through that middle ground. And it may seem like, oh, I'm being difficult. They may tell you that you're being difficult, or why can't you just work as a team? And it's unfortunate that you have to be this way and all of that. But, no relationship, no dynamic is worth your safety or your sanity. And if it's wearing you out trying to communicate with this person, or to open up your text and get a barrage of insults every now and again, like, you don't need to put up with that. So, what do you think? That was a lot. What do you think about all that, Shay?
I was just sitting here thinking about the irony of that, the thing where, why can't you be a team player and we can resolve this? Well, gee, if that were true, we wouldn't be doing this.
Right.
It just, that just is really, but yeah, I liked the chapter where he did the good, the wise, the foolish, and the evil, because breaking it down that way is much simpler, and it avoids all the labels of cluster B things that we can get kind of roped into trying to determine, are they, aren't they, is there hope, isn't there hope? And that's its own kind of black hole. You can really, I got sucked into that. I think a lot of us have gone down that path for a while and trying to figure out what's what, and looking at those 3 simple ways of how people are behaving and what it means and how to interact with them, I thought was really useful.
I agree completely. I mentioned in the live stream last night, I had a friend at work who did this 180 on me and made my life an absolute living hell. And old me and not even like that old me, like 6 months ago me probably would have really gone back and forth thinking like, okay, what she's doing is seriously like sadistic and just cruel and hateful and awful. Is this an event or a pattern? Can this be worked on or not? Because there were a lot of good things about her, but it just boiled down to, this person is willfully trying to cause me pain, and seeing it in that light of, if somebody's actually trying to cause you pain, like, you got to just get out of there. Like, there is no friendship there. There might've been before. I kind of have an idea of what flipped the switch for her, but like, nothing reasonable. I was in the process of writing this book and had mentioned that I'm like, I'd love to be able to do my website stuff full time. And it was that conversation. She did this 180 and she literally sneered at me and said, "Oh, you really think you'd make enough to do that?" And it was that Monday at work, everything changed. And she just made my life an absolute living hell. And she was fine before. And I really thought, well, maybe she's, I know, self-esteem issues, or maybe whatever. Like, I could have justified it any number of ways.
Yeah.
But it was just like,
it's not a justification for harm.
No. And like, your friend should celebrate your victories, right? Instead of, trying to tear you down further and go, full psycho like that. So that was very powerful. Like, you don't need to wait around for things to get bad enough that you can't hang on anymore.
Nope.
So, okay. Point number 11, changing requires urgency. Human beings are wired for consistency and to avoid change. People resist change when there is no reason to make it. If you were comfortable and I told you to get up and go for a run, you would probably resist doing it. If I told you the building is on fire, run, you'd be a lot more motivated. We make changes when we feel pain. If you normally shop at a certain store and have no real desire to stop shopping there, if I told you that a store a few miles away was having a 75% off sale, you'd be a lot more motivated. We need to realize that something bad is going to happen if we continue down this path, and something good will happen if we do something different. You are not designed to cope, but to thrive, and you can't thrive without pruning. So, and he says, you can get some strategies to create urgency. Make your mind feel the urgency by playing out the movie. Do you want to feel the same way in a year from now? Go look at yourself in the mirror and ask yourself if you want to lie to yourself or tell yourself the truth. If you are ready to tell yourself the truth, then think of all of the realities of the situation you've been avoiding. Think of all the frustration. Think of how you will continue to feel this way and how you will feel this way a year from now. In the day-to-day, you may be able to numb yourself, but thinking about it long-term might make you realize how awful feeling this way really is. Create a compelling vision for your future. Make it exciting. Make the pleasure part of that something that helps to pull you. So while pain pushes us out of the comfort zone, it can be really helpful to have something positive that can pull us.
Agree. I really liked this section a lot.
Yeah.
I had never really thought before at all about how to create urgency in my life. That was a totally new idea to me. And I think it's a very powerful tool to use. And he gave a lot of really good things to think about for ways that you could actually get unstuck. And, because we all have things where we feel like we're procrastinating or we're stuck, even if it's just a job. It doesn't have to be anything toxic like this, but just having the power to shift out of a rut and get going again. I thought that this chapter was really good for a lot of ideas for how to do that.
Yeah.
To me.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of figuring out, like, what do you need to do to get leverage on yourself? And
yes.
I want to kind of a side note here. Like, one of my types of shows that I really enjoy watching is a lot of like the extreme weight loss shows. And it's so interesting and motivating to me to watch these stories of people that have lost like this tremendous amount of weight. And they oftentimes will talk about, it's this one moment where like they see a picture of them. Generally, it's like they see a picture of themselves and that cuts that cognitive dissonance of, oh my God, I did not realize I'd gained that much weight. And, they may keep that picture on their fridge and it keeps them motivated to be like, this is not me. Like, this is not, I don't want to feel this way. I don't want to look this way. Like, I need to get it in gear and, kind of figuring it out. But some people might be really motivated by buying, if you're trying to lose weight, buying an outfit, like you're, kind of a gold dress or goal lingerie or what have you that really motivates you to getting to that place. But, I think in terms of like a relationship, it's kind of thinking about, yeah, what would this be like in 5 years? And, you know, like,
That's where a lot of anxiety comes from too, in my
yeah,
opinion, is that idea of if it's something where we would be really upset or miserable if we were in the same situation now in 5 years, that causes anxiety. I mean, it's huge, which is another reason I like this whole necessary endings thing, because when you're able to do that, you're able to squelch a lot of the things that cause anxiety in your life. And that's very powerful too.
yeah, that's huge. I think then that probably right there alone, right? Like if you're like, okay, this to have things continue going the way that they're going, if I was in this exact same spot 5 years from now, if I were to just think, oh, F my life, then something needs to end. Like either we need to get clear on a strategy or we need to get clear on like how to start pruning. So, and a lot of people they get to that point where they have to go back 7 times before they really hit rock bottom. And it's the same with abusive relationships. It's the same with drinking. It's the same with drug addiction. It's the same oftentimes with weight loss. It's the same with any type of, because it goes back to that. We have to retrain our brain to do things totally different,
Mm-hmm.
and
it's not easy.
and it's not easy for any of us. Like it's really, it takes a while, Uh,
I thought the section where he described hoarders was pretty interesting too.
yeah, let me scroll down here. Oh, and he gives the example, measure and evaluate what you want to grow. He gives the example of report cards for kids, which kids these days, I guess, are kind of up a creek because grades are done very differently. But, back when we were in school, you only got a report card, a couple times a year. And then generally, if you weren't doing good, then you got grounded or there were consequences. You got to get your grades up. But generally parents don't realize how their kids are doing till they see a report card. Then there's a sense of urgency. The shift would be seeing weekly grades help keep your child on track. Sort of like if you're trying to lose weight, like weighing yourself, every week can really help. Or, doing those kinds of, or within an abusive relationship, checking in with yourself and getting more in tune with your emotions. How do I feel? Have I had any stress this week? If so, what was it? Am I feeling any physical pain? If so, why? And
That's
kind
big.
of gauging that on a regular basis is really huge.
It's amazing how much this stuff can show up in our bodies. That's incredible.
For real. Yeah, it really, really is. Let's see. Let me scroll down here. Learning to say no to yourself. I think that's a big one. No, you can't have that. If this business isn't profitable in a year, I will shut it down. If I have not found the job I want by June 1st, I will move. If Diana doesn't quit drinking and start going to AA tonight like she promised, I'm leaving. You need to learn how much time and resources you want to spend on something before all these resources are spent. Begin with the end in mind. This way you won't get derailed. So you can tell yourself, I really want to I want to fire this person, but I want to leave on good terms. I want to leave this conversation letting the person know that if they contact me again, I'm calling the police. Practice. This is a big thing. Practice and role play if you think it might help. For example, if you have to be around a toxic person, it can really help to rehearse what you are going to say to them and what they're most likely going to say to you. Practice what you are going to say under ideal conditions is good, but practicing it while being knocked off balance is better. There's a, I think we talked about this before. There is a group of like samurai warriors. Heard about this the other day. They call it the Way of the Bushuda, I think is what it's called. And these different samurai warriors would practice facing their death. So kind of like worst case scenario, right? For our situation. And so they would rehearse these different scenarios of all these different ways that they would go to war. And so when they actually happened, they'd already rehearsed it in their brain. And so much of that we can use when we're dealing with a toxic person. Like if you have to go to court, if you have to co-parent, if you have to do these things, to rehearse in your mind, what are some things that they're probably going to say? What are some things that what are some comebacks that you can have? Or how can you practice not talking, maybe, and not reacting, especially if they're trying to bait you into being angry or what have you. So
That's
practicing
interesting that the military has been using that kind of strategy to try and prevent some PTSD by preparing soldiers before they go into a conflict or whatever it is for what the worst case scenarios would be, and taking them through, how would they react to that, and then picturing it going successfully. Then when they get over there, and anything less than the worst case scenario it's not traumatizing, because it's not unexpected. Something being unexpected is part of what makes it traumatizing, is what they're saying with this.
It makes total
sense. The people who went through this kind of training came back with a much lower incidence of PTSD symptoms. So it's something, in what I'm getting at here is in keeping ourselves from being continually re-traumatized. I think that could be very useful in the same way that, to go through that practice and to go through the mental idea of, okay, what are the worst things and what can I do? And especially if you can practice with somebody, I think I've never had the chance to do that, but that sounds like it could be an amazing tool to use.
Yeah. And I think if you can have somebody that knows the toxic person well enough, or you can maybe even coach them and just say, this is what they normally do. They normally pick on me about my weight or my height or my parenting, or they make snarky comments. You could
play them first and give them the,
Oh, that's a good idea. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then
it might actually be kind of a release, because it would be sort of like making fun of them. It might actually kind of feel good for a few minutes.
Yeah, it might. I mean, there's a lot to be said for, even doing this with kind of an empty chair, like imagining, this toxic person or this abuser there, and confronting them and letting everything that you want to say to them, saying it to that empty chair, and just
or to their picture, especially if there's somebody compelling to you. I just thought about that. But if you tend to weaken in front of them, if you practice it looking at them, that might help. I've never tried it, so this is just an idea. I don't know. But it could be worth trying.
Yeah, I like it. I think so too. It says, okay, talks about the last point here is, there's kind of this sense of loss and grief and grieving when something does end. And, even though endings are normal, that there's still this grief process. And it's so important. He said, grief is like any other emotion. There's a lot of energy in it. And to work through that energy, we have to have some sort of ending, whether it be a tribute or a letting go ceremony. And then part of the letting go ceremony is when we're ready to do this, is to kind of examine what if there were any patterns present, and kind of squeeze out anything useful and necessary out of that, any lessons that we can learn, and then eliminate the waste. So, and I like how he phrased that. He said, metabolize it. So when
I liked that too.
Yeah. Metabolize it. Examine what is useful and necessary and what is waste. Just experiences are like food. We eliminate waste, and if we don't, we get sick. So take out what you can from it and then let the rest go. So yeah, I think that was pretty much it. This book was seriously fantastic, and I just can't even recommend it enough. It
And he
really.
does have it in audiobook, by the way, because I know
Oh, does
people were
he?
asking about that. Yeah, and it's good. He reads it himself, and he's a good narrator. And if you like audiobooks, I've got both versions. I really liked the audiobook version. Hearing him say these things kind of puts it in your head in a different way too. So I
Yeah.
found that valuable.
Yeah. Yeah. This is, like I said, this is one of my favorite books that we've read so far. And I think this is also a good book to talk to kids about, especially kids that are getting ready to start dating, because
Yes.
this stuff
Yeah.
isn't hot, and letting them know, like, you know, when they're, especially when they're getting into their teens, about friendships and jobs. And because it can be so traumatic to get fired or to quit a job. And, like, we're not taught these skills of, like, most people don't put 2 weeks in, especially when you're younger. Like, there's this feeling of this is going to be really awkward, and they just call in and they quit. And, like, teaching kids, like, how to have healthy endings to things, and that it's okay for things to end. And
That's a
so,
really great point.
yeah, it's good. So I hope you guys enjoyed that book club. And then I also there's an Audible thing. What is it? I have it written down, audibletrial.com. If you go to audibletrial.com/thrive after abuse, you can get, if you sign up for Audible, you get like a free Audible book of your choosing. So there's that. And then for those of you that weren't here last night, I published my book like Sunday, I think it was. So that's super exciting. You can find that on Amazon. It's called Start Here. And there's several books called Start Here, which probably wasn't the best title for it, but there's several books called Start Here, but it's by Dana Morningstar. And that book covers definitions, frequently asked questions. It covers a lot of ground with all of this, so many of the common questions. Even if, I don't know, it was, to me, it was the book that I wished I had when I was going through all of this. So I put pretty much everything the book covers in the table of contents. So if you kind of want to find out more in depth, like, you can always go to Amazon and just do the look inside and look at the table of contents, and you can see everything that it includes in there. So I think that's what we got tonight. You guys, thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you Wednesday for the regular live stream, 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And as always, lots of love to you. You're not alone. You're not crazy, and you really can move forward and heal from this. So take care, and we'll see you next time. Okay, let's see if I can do this, Shay, without